Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I like hearing about myself. That's nice. But actually, kidding aside, it's amazing to have been able to do this show. I'm going to keep this kind of short, but so I'm really happy that Ben asked me to do this, and Thor was a part of this too, but mainly Ben inviting me to do this show because, like I was telling somebody else before we started, I've never seen this amount of my own work in one space before, and I was hoping that it would have like an effect that I wouldn't know previously, and it did. I feel like, you want the work to do something, and I do feel like as a group, they are much more powerful as a group. And, the space itself really lends itself to creating the environment and the mood and the space. That's really an important part of it. To not have direct natural light is super important to me. Natural light is a real big distraction when I'm working, and it becomes that way when you view these works. Like there's always going to be, I think, well, not always. There might be some some reference to like Rothko in terms of like mood and some sort of space that's created, and he wanted always like low light, and for me, I need that too. Like this is an ideal format to see these pieces, and for them to be in this space particularly, because this could have been in a different spot in the museum, but after talking to Ben, we decided, and we were glad to be able to use this space because it's a little bit separate. It's kind of entering its own space. I feel like this stuff kind of lives here, so it's been really great to see all of this together. So real quick, I'm gonna read something real quick just about, this is called time being, right? And so what time being is there's this text by Dogen, who's a 13th century monk, Zen monk, and he has this fascicle, they call it, which is just a piece of writing, and it's called Uji, which is being time or time being, so for the time being. And so really, that's what these pieces are. So let me just read this real quick. It says, to study, this is a different text. This is called Genjo Koan, and I don't mean to be teaching, but it just happens. And I don't claim to be teaching, but you are being subjected to text. So it says, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. So the summary again, I'm just going to say it real quick. It's like, to know the self is to study the self. And then to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. So myriad things means life, So like to me, when somebody's like, what are these about, or what are you trying to do? It's like, this is just my life. That's really all it is. Like, it's my life, my space, my time, my environment, my experiences, everything is just coming about and coming to be in this form, in this space and time, right? So everything that I do leads into something else. So when the work is created, that's how it always is created. One thing leads to the next. I don't have a specific idea anymore of what I want to do. I'm just kind of letting it be what it's going to be. And that sounds really like simplistic and maybe a little wishy-washy, but what it means is like I'm not directing it as much as I'm just becoming a part of it. So I'm like a facilitator of space and time and color and form in this way. So when I'm working in that way, well, these are imaginary landscapes, right? That's what I kind of call them. So, this one I know that we're like focused on because we're looking at this one here, but if we look around the room, they're slightly different. This one's very bright, and these other ones are fairly muted. But kind of like the idea behind these is I'm trying to, well, how do I want to put this? I want to say it like this first. When you look at these pieces, and let's look at the ones back there real quick. You know, when we look at these pieces, if you've looked and seen the drawings in the little case there, you're going to see that they're very specifically drawn, right? So they're, yeah, in the case. So they're very intuitive in their structure. Like they're very intuitive, like I'm working with, without a direction or without a reference, right? But once the intuitive part is kind of started, then they become very specific, right? So they're really drawn, they're really balanced. And the reason is because if you look at some of these, or all of these, if you look at them, they would be considered incorrect. The drawings are not right, but they're very specific. And they're very specific because they need to be balanced. Because if you look at the drawings, if you look at what the structure is of these paintings, they feel very balanced, right? But if you look at the drawings, they are actually imbalanced. The drawing and the composition, in reality, it could never work. The perspective is off from one part to another. So the drawing gets very specific because it has to balance all of the parts that are incorrect. And I won't tell you what that's supposed to do. Usually people decide for themselves what that does. But usually it creates some sort of feeling. So I don't need to really describe what I'm trying to do with that. But something occurs when that happens. And really, I mean, that's, to be personal, I mean, I think that must be how I look at life, right? Or that this is how life is. It is both solid and ephemeral at the same time. You know what I mean? You're standing on solid ground that is never solid, you know? And so these pieces are essentially an exploration of that, which really is not a philosophical pursuit or a spiritual pursuit or anything like that. It's just me noticing how my life is. And when I look at all the parts of life, I see that too, that all things are made up of everything. So in these pieces, what happens is I'm working with, let's call it a matrix, which are these lines and forms. And there's been great freedom in the restriction that I've placed on these, right? Which means that once I've created a structure, then I have endless possibilities. When you have endless possibilities, it just tends to fall apart. But when you create a structure to work within, each variation, each tiny variation completely changes everything. So the freedom in these is that if I were to talk about these paintings and say, describe them, it's like, is this a finished painting? Yes, it's a finished painting. But it's just like, if we could compare it to a book, it's like any one of these paintings is like a word, in a sentence, in a paragraph, in a chapter, in a book, on a shelf, in a library, you know what I mean? The work is all of it, right? And the work is my time and my life and my space and everything involved in that. So yes, they're complete as they are. And the freedom is to, in their completeness, you know, not need to resolve everything, right? Because like if you solve everything, what are you gonna do? And if you keep trying to do everything all the time, if you keep trying to put everything, all your ideas into one thing, you never get anything done, right? It just keeps going. So the freedom, that the restriction that I've placed on this allowed is that the variations become the next painting, you know? So it's like, I've learned a lot about how to work by working, right? I didn't learn how to work and then go work. So like the painting, the creativity, all of that, you learn all of that by doing, right? There's no ending to anything, right? It's just continual. So, so like I was saying, like the the freedom that allows is, I don't know, it's a gift that I think you could say you give yourself, or I'll personalize it and say like that I gave myself, which is like, leave it be. It's as perfect as it's supposed to be now. And then the variation that I want to explore, it does not need to be resolved now. That's the next one. And so in that way, like the work is able to keep reinventing itself. And I mean, in the beginning of any creative process, like you're either trying to say something or you're trying to figure out what to do next. And now, like, I don't have that, I don't have that. I just am letting it be what it is. And every time I draw a line, I'm aware, like all things, that line has a power, like all things have a power. Each event of our life has a power that changes and shapes us and moves us. And just if I draw a single line, that suggests another line. And there's a lot of tension in the line, and there's a lot of pushing and pulling. And if you draw one line, and if you try to like vary it a little bit, you get drawn back to that same magnetic line. So these drawings, they become like a meditation in space and in line, and understanding balance. And a discovery that is minor to the world, but important to me. And it was so important at the time. I'm like, this is my secret. I won't tell anybody. But when I was doing these paintings, when I was doing these drawings, and a lot of these drawings were done in Maine at a residency. But like on a painting like this, or like that one, I do it at a scale. So like the scale would be 7.5 inches by 10 inches. And then I multiply it by 4, and I learn, and I do all my calculations. And I like to do them by hand because I like to waste time. But I'm doing all of the fractions and everything, and I keep noticing the same numbers appearing. And then I'm noticing that every line that I put on there, it's either halving itself, cut in half, or doubling itself. So when I say they're intuitive, the drawings are very intuitive, but they get super technical. And I know that they're right intuitively because they become balanced, and they need to be balanced in a way that they can counteract the shifts in perspective that are occurring, that are a part of this. You don't notice them really, but if you look at horizon lines, you'll see these things probably don't work. But so when I'm saying that they're intuitive and they're balanced, it's because they can't be anything but what they need to be. And so in any moment, there's a specific way that things can happen. And so when I construct a line, it's required now that I respond to that in another way that makes sense. So even though they're intuitively drawn, they become pretty technical, and then when I'm scaling them up, I realize these actually are balanced because they are literally halved and doubled. And I don't know if you're really following what I'm saying when I'm saying that, but the proportions between lines and the sizes of lines and the lengths, they are all halves and quarters or doubles of each other. So they were intuitively balanced. So that felt really good, because all I ever wanted to do was become a balanced person, and in the work I can see that it's becoming that way. These things are balanced. They are solid and ephemeral at the same time. So I really love that I had the opportunity to do this show. Like Ben said, I worked like crazy to do it. If you walk around and look, you'll see how many of these when did this open? March 29th? Yeah. How many of these paintings were painted in 2023? Most of them. So I was able to, and that comes from like I said, doing the work. Like you don't learn how to do work, you do work. And knowing, and anytime you commit to one thing, you have to restrict in other areas, right? But knowing that can be temporary to do what you need to do. So I was able to just let this become, my full consciousness for like 75 days, every day. Get out of work, go out to the studio, work all night, stay up way too late, be tired the next day. But like just continually do it, because when you hit that wave in your life of whatever it is, you know, you try to stay up on it, you know, as long as you can. It becomes like easier and easier, because the interruptions aren't interruptions anymore. They all just become a part of it, because you're focused.